Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Peter, and I just wanted to say thanks so much for tuning in. Now, if you're new to my content, welcome. You can check out my other posing tutorials for Iron Man, War Machine, Thanos, Batman, and more right here on this channel. But in today's episode, we'll be going over how to pose the last son of Krypton, Superman, along with a few other members from the Justice League by Hot Toys. Now, I do want to say a quick thanks to fellow collectors for helping to shape this episode. For starters, I actually bought my Superman from Toys Wonderland based on positive shopping experiences from collectors within the community, and it arrived safely just a few days later. Additionally, I put out a feeler on social media asking which Batman figure people wanted to see in this episode, and if they'd prefer a step-by-step tutorial or a showcase video instead. And since feedback was pretty mixed, I decided to incorporate both, so thanks everyone for your input, and kudos to Toys Wonderland for their speedy service. Now, we've got 10 poses for Superman and friends, so we've got a lot to cover, starting with a few safety tips first. As usual, there will be timestamps down below if you wish to go back or skip ahead. And it's worth mentioning that some of these poses are a bit risky, so I can only recommend that you pose within your own comfort level. With all that being said, it's time to get on with the show. Alright, and here he is, Clark Kent, Kal-El, Superman in all his glory. Now, to say that this figure has been highly anticipated by many would be an understatement. I mean, collectors around the world waited years for this to release, and it was delayed so much that it even became a running joke for a while. But I gotta say that even after all this time, the wait was most definitely worth it in my opinion, especially since this is my first Superman figure. I mean, just check out the reflective sheen and vibrancy of his suit. We've got this beautifully vivid blue, the searing red and gold of his emblem, the updated paint application of his skin, and of course, one of the best included items, the additional heat vision head sculpt. Now, I'll admit to being a Hot Toys fanboy, because damn, this is one of those times when my expectations were exceeded. I mean, red eyes alone would have been more than enough for me, but once again, Hot Toys went above and beyond and painted his eyes translucent so that a hidden pair of red LEDs could accentuate his rage. I mean, how awesome is that engineering? You know, it's one thing for helmeted figures to have separate clear eyes that light up white, like for Iron Man and Armored Batman, but to have a fully painted head sculpt with translucent veiny eyes that burn bright red with heat vision, that just blows my mind, so this was absolutely worth the wait for me. Anyways, enough gushing. Moving on to the safety tips, as mentioned in Justin's review, you'll want to be very careful when handling this figure. Specifically, the paint on the red and yellow emblem is very fragile and can be scratched or flake off with enough force, so be sure to grip the figure around the back or sides when possible. Now, in terms of the suit itself, it's a very thin, lightweight fabric that easily slides around the entire chrome body underneath, so it's actually quite flexible all around. However, because it's so thin, it might also yield a higher risk for damage, especially where the joints bend and fold at the knees and elbows. Granted, I can't really speak to the longevity or durability of the suit because it's still so new, but to be safe, like all form-fitted figures, I'd still recommend pulling the fabric apart at the joints when posing to avoid pinching or slicing the fabric in these areas. Also, I noticed that the long sleeves tend to sink into the wrist pegs, causing them to become pinched by the hands at certain angles, so be mindful to pull the sleeves up for better clearance when posing the hands. Moving over to his body, the suit has these thinly raised contours at the obliques that are susceptible to dents if you leave him on the flight stand for too long, so be mindful of their fragility. I actually wrapped a protective layer of foam around my clamp just to be safe, which you'll see later on. Now, fortunately, the torso has a really wide range of motion, namely the upper body rotates pretty freely all around, while the lower torso has a decent swivel as well, allowing for some really dynamic poses, albeit ground or aerial. And moving on down to the legs, like all form-fitted figures, we'll want to be really careful when raising the thighs because the fabric often sinks into the pelvis where it can be pinched or sliced by the musculature of the thighs. And so, an easy remedy to this is to simply pull the fabric apart to alleviate some of that tension when posing. Same goes for behind the knee as well. And while we're on the topic of bending limbs, it's worth mentioning that hot and humid climates will likely cause the suit to stick to itself. I've seen photos where figures like Vision, Tech Suit Spidey, or Black Panther had torn or melted fabric at the joints from being pulled apart while stuck together, so it's best not to leave the arms or legs bent long term if you live in a hot or humid area. Now, this here is less of a safety tip and more of a heads up, but the boots do slide around the shins quite a bit, so be sure to properly align the boots to his knees when possible. And speaking of his boots, the final safety tip we have pertains to the fabric at the ankles. you'll see that when his boots are pointed down, everything looks fine, which also works well for flight poses. However, when he's standing upright, the fabric kinda bunches up or slides into the ankle joint just like Tech Suit Spidey from Homecoming. And so, to overcome this obstacle, we can simply pull the fabric up at the shins when pointing his boots upright to help prevent it from bunching up too much. Granted, it's kinda unavoidable depending on the angle of his foot, but I figured every little bit helps. And that's pretty much it for Superman's safety tips. There are a few more regarding his flight poses and other figures in the video, but we'll go over those when we get there. With everything that we've learned so far, it's time to get on with the posing. Alright, so here we have Superman in a fairly neutral but iconic and instantly recognizable pose. And although Henry Cavill never posed like this in the DCEU, I figured I'd be remiss to not include it in an episode dedicated to Superman. Fortunately, it's a fairly easy pose even for newer collectors as well, so we'll pretty much breeze through this one. And so, the first thing we'll want to do is swap out his relaxed hands for the closed fists. Now heads up, as mentioned in the safety tips, the suit does slip and slide around the body quite a bit, so it's easy to lose grip when trying to attach the hands. And so, what we'll want to do is firmly squeeze the top of the forearm near the elbow while also pulling the sleeve up at the wrist when attaching any hands. Doing so allows for better grip of the suit and proper clearance of the sleeve. Next, we'll want to raise his arm up at the shoulder to about 45 degrees, followed by bending his forearm in at the elbow to about 90 degrees. But remember to pull up on the fabric while doing so to alleviate any tension on the suit at the forearm. Once the knuckles make contact with his waist, simply do the same with the other arm, but be mindful not to crush the sleeves when pointing the fists inward. Once that's done, we can begin making adjustments to the rest of his body. Simply tilt the upper torso back just a bit in order to puff out his chest, followed by turning his head up and to the left. Next, we can widen his stance by slowly pulling his legs apart at the thighs, then pivot both ankles inwards before placing him on the table. For the cape, simply group all the fabric together for it to appear more flush at the bottom. All that's left now is to puff out his chest a little more, raise his head up, and there's Superman standing for truth, justice, and the American way. Alright, and for our next pose, we have one of my favorite moments in Justice League, and it's actually the post-credits scene where Flash and Superman warm up for their race to settle once and for all who's the fastest man alive. Now, for those who remember, this was actually a fun little callback to when they raced in the comics, the Justice League animated series, and even the TV show Smallville, so I really appreciated the inclusion of this brief but lighthearted scene. Now, fortunately, there's really not much to change for Superman other than a few minor tweaks. For example, we can turn his head down and to the right, followed by extending his right arm out to the side to convey him talking to Flash through the use of body language. Also, be sure to attach the relaxed right hand to really sell the pose. The inspiration comes from when Clark puts Barry on the spot about taking the League to brunch. And so, once his hand is attached, we can tilt his chest forward ever so slightly, followed by bringing his right leg back at the thigh just a bit. Lastly, we can tilt his forehead down even more to convey his eye contact with Barry, then gently clean up the folds of his cape. And that's pretty much it for Superman, so now it's time to bring in the Scarlet Speedster. Now, I gotta say, this figure has held up really well. I mean, I've kept my Flash in some pretty aggressive poses throughout the year, like being hunched over, touching the ground, or preparing to sprint towards Pet Sematary Clark, and despite these long-term aggressive poses, the suit hasn't sustained any severe dents or imprints, so hopefully the techniques that I'm about to go over might help with that. Now, before we begin, be sure to attach the relaxed hands for this pose. And so, when it comes to bending his legs pretty aggressively, we'll want to remove the Velcro armor first so that we can easily manipulate the suit at the thighs. Once that's done, we can raise his right leg up at the thigh while pulling the fabric away from the socket to alleviate some tension in the suit. Then we can apply the same technique behind the knee so that the suit doesn't become pinched or sliced between the sharp angle of the joint. Next, we can point his right foot up since it'll need to be flat on the table momentarily. And for his left leg, simply raise it out to the side while being mindful of the fabric. We can keep his left knee straight to convey him stretching his hamstring muscles, but be sure to point his left foot up pretty aggressively. Then simply reattach the Velcro armor to each leg before moving back up to his arms. And now that the legs are in place, we can begin posing his arms to interact with his body accordingly. For his right arm, we can bend it inwards at the elbow in order to rest his palm on his thigh, but be gentle with the suit at the forearm. Once that's done, we can move over to the other side and extend his left arm behind the leg. All that's left now is to place him on the table and fine-tune the details. We can bend his right knee in for a more aggressive stretch, and we can choose to have him focus down towards the floor or looking up over at Clark. I had him looking down in this segment here, but ultimately I raised his head back up during the turntable sequence. Whichever way you have it, there's our warm-up pose. Alright, and here we have another fairly easy but dynamic pose, and it was inspired by the desert hostage scene in BVS when Superman comes crashing through the roof to save Lois. And so, the first thing we'll want to do is bring his left arm down to the side, but remember to attach both fists for this pose while also being mindful not to crush the sleeves between the joints. Next, we can turn his head more to the left while tilting it down, followed by turning his upper chest inward to convey some aggression through body language. And moving on down to his legs, we can widen his stance by pulling his right leg out to the side while bending the knee ever so slightly. Also, be sure to pivot the ankle inwards for better balance. We can also pull the left leg out just a bit while keeping the left knee straight and the ankle tilted inward. All that's left now is to place him on the table, make some minor adjustments to his cape and posture, and there you have it. Alright, and here we have our very first flight pose from when he was floating above all the tanks at the military base in front of General Swanwick in Man of Steel. Now, fortunately, there's not much to change for this pose because it borrows heavily from our last one. First, we can tilt his head up just a bit while slightly extending his arms to be a little less tense. Then we can lower his left thigh at the pelvis while pointing the left boot all the way down as well. Next, we can lower his right leg just a bit with a minor bend at the knee. Now, when it comes to hovering poses for godlike figures like Superman and Thor, the secret is to point both feet down and slightly inward at the ankles. Doing so helps convey the forces of gravity pulling on their feet, which in turn makes their levitation a little more convincing. Now that's pretty much it for Superman's pose, so all that's left now is to bring in the dynamic flight stand. Now, as you can see here, I decided to add a layer of protective foam around the clamp because small dents were appearing on the raised patterns of the suit prior to filming. And if anyone's wondering, it is the same protective foam that's included with various Hot Toys figures. I just cut a few pieces apart and glued it together haphazardly. Hey everyone, it's me from the future. I just wanted to drop in with a quick update on casual flight poses. I originally filmed and edited this video back in mid-2020 when my figure was brand new, but with some experimenting, I've realized there is a quick and easy way to pose him hovering without the unsightly clamp digging into his suit. Now, there's no need for foam, glue, or tape for this updated process, and the figure requires no alterations either. Simply wrap a paper clip or a small flexible wire around the dynamic pole to form a hook, then unzip the back of the suit and insert the two hooks directly into the joint at his upper back while leaving the suit unzipped. The cape does not need to be removed or cut for this method, and it's a safe and easy way to pose him while hovering vertically. Now, I suppose this method could work for horizontal flight poses as well, but that's a bit riskier. Either way, I hope that helps, and now back to your regularly scheduled programming. In any case, once we attach him to the flight stand, we'll want to use his body and cape to hide the dynamic pole as much as possible. And to do this, we can gently turn the clamp to his right, while also making minor adjustments to the angle of his leg. As the pose begins to take shape, we can choose whether to have him looking out into the distance, or looking down towards his specific target. Also, we can tuck any excess fabric of the cape behind his right heel in order to hide the flight stand, while also conveying a very minor sense of wind direction. Of course, this is where a wired cape would most definitely come in handy, so I may upgrade to one of those in the future. But there you have it, Superman hovering in all his Kryptonian godlike glory. Alright, and next up we have a slightly more heroic pose, and it's when Superman rescued a girl from a burning building in BVS. Now, I suppose you could throw any figure in his arms if you want to have a little fun with it, but Ellie here made a pretty good stand-in. And so, once again, there's not much to change for Superman's pose other than a few minor tweaks from the last one. Specifically, we can recenter his chest while turning his head down and to the right, followed by swapping out both fists for the relaxed hands, but be sure to have the palms facing up. Then we can slightly raise the arms up at the shoulders with about a 90-degree bend at the forearms while gently maneuvering the fabric away from the pinch points. And that's pretty much it for Superman. So now we can bring in our damsel in distress, which in this case is Ellie by CC Toys. Now, I normally don't dabble too much in third-party unlicensed figures, but because Ellie's in the spotlight here, I just wanted to give a shout out to CC Toys for their remarkable craftsmanship of this figure set. She comes in a 2-pack with Joel from The Last of Us, and they both have dirt and bloodstains on the face, hands, pants, and shoes, and they come with tons of fun accessories and seasonal outfits that match their video game counterparts. In any case, we can swing her right arm back at the shoulder while tilting her head forward and to the left to be looking up. Then we can raise the left arm up to about chest level so that we can eventually have it resting on Superman's shoulder. Next, we'll want to fold her lower body in at the pelvis with about a 90-degree bend at the knees while having her feet crossed over one another. Then simply place her in Superman's arms so we can fine-tune the details. For example, we can wrap her left arm around Superman's shoulder while adjusting her head accordingly to make eye contact. We can also make adjustments to the flight stand in order to hide it behind Superman's body, followed by any other tweaks that need fixing along the way. And there you have it. Superman saves the day. Alright, and here we have a pose from one of my favorite scenes in all of cinema, and it's when Superman takes first flight in Man of Steel. Now, I particularly enjoyed this scene so much because of how well crafted it was, ranging from Jor-El explaining to Kal why he's so different, and how he's destined to become a beacon of hope for the people of Earth, to the evolution of the scene, both visually and musically, as he stumbles and falls but never gives up. And of course, the booming crescendo of Hans Zimmer's musical score, combined with Superman breaking the sound barrier while launching into the stratosphere, just gets me every damn time. Now, for the pose itself, it's fairly easy to do, but does have a few safety concerns, which we'll cover momentarily. The first thing we'll want to do is swap out the relaxed open hands for the closed fists. Then we can tilt both his head and upper chest all the way back. Next, we'll want to raise his arms up high at the shoulder, but be sure to do so very slowly. As you can see here, carelessly moving the arms up causes the suit to bunch up in front while adding tension towards the back of the shoulder. Granted, some creases and wrinkles are inevitable with a pose like this, but at least we can mitigate this by easing as much tension around this area as possible. Now, you can choose how aggressive you want his arms to be inward, but once you've dialed in one arm, simply match the other arm to the same degree. And as you can see here, there's no need to change his legs from our previous hovering pose because they're already stretched out. And so, we can simply tilt the flight stand forward with the clamp facing up before attaching him to it at the midsection. Now, when it comes to his cape, we can take both ends at the sides and simply fold them over one another while layering them on top of his boots. Doing so prevents it from drooping down at the sides, which ultimately helps convey the horizontal trajectory of his flight path. And there's our mid-action flight pose. Alright, and here we have part 2 of our previous pose, Who's the Fastest Man Alive? Only this time, they've sprung into action. Now, heads up, the editing will get faster from here on out since we've covered the basics for both figures. And so, for Superman, we can give him a more dynamic flight pose by loosening him up a bit. Specifically, we can turn his head a little to his left while bringing his left arm out just a bit, followed by rotating his right arm down and out to the side with a minor bend at the forearm. Now for his legs, you can choose which one you'd prefer to raise, and as you can see here, I extended his right leg to be straight, then brought his left leg up at the thigh with a fairly sharp bend at the knee. Next, we can swivel his body in at the torso while pushing his chest all the way back for a more aggressive flight. As the pose begins to take shape, we can adjust the clamp of the flight stand to face down and to the right in order to conceal most of it. And when attaching Superman to the clamp, be sure to wrap his extended leg behind the pole for better balance and stability. All that's left now is to gently rest the left side of his cape on the display base while using the right side of the cape to conceal the clamp. And that's pretty much it for Superman, so now we can move on over to Flash. And so, we can begin by rotating his right arm back just a bit while tilting his head up. Then we can raise his left arm up at the shoulder with about a 90-degree bend at the forearm, but be sure to use the swivel at the bicep to angle his arm diagonally. Now moving on down, we can raise the right leg up at the thigh pretty aggressively while bringing his left leg back just a bit. Then we can reattach the Velcro armor to both legs first before making some final adjustments. Specifically, we can straighten the left leg at the knee while pointing the foot down to convey him launching off the ground, followed by bending the right knee in all the way, but again, be mindful to pull the fabric apart behind the knee to avoid potential damage. All that's left now is to place him on the stand, and that's pretty much it. Now, if you want to make Flash's running pose even more aggressive, you can simply twist his entire body in at the pelvis. But there's our racing pose. Alright, and here we have an action pose that was directly inspired by the incredible Batman vs Superman diorama by Sideshow Collectibles. Now, I remember being pretty awestruck when I first saw that statue in a comic shop, and I knew I had to try it out when my Superman figure would arrive, so hopefully this segment can inspire someone else to give it a go. And so, the first thing we'll want to do is attach the left relaxed hand, followed by lowering his arm at the shoulder to about chest level. Then we can raise the right arm up to about the same height, but with a slightly deeper upwards bend at the forearm. Next, we can swap out his neutral head sculpt for the angry heat vision one, but feel free to install the batteries prior to this step. And once attached, we can tilt both his head and upper body backwards and towards his left to eventually be peering up at Batman. Now moving on down to his legs, we'll want to be sure to widen his stance at the thighs in order to help with his balance. Similar to what was covered in my previous videos for Thanos and Director Krennic, the secret ingredient to achieving mid-action posing lies within the ankle joints. And so, once we've bent his legs and boots accordingly, we can make some final adjustments by twisting his body even more as he winds up for the swing, or by turning his head to match Batman's line of sight. And that's pretty much it for Superman. Now, when it comes to Batman's poses in this video, I decided not to include step-by-step instructions because they borrow heavily from my previous episode for Batman, so I just posed them off camera to avoid redundancy. But here's a closer look for reference. The accessories that I used were the growling mouthpiece, the eyes that glare to his right, and a few batarangs just for aesthetics. Also, the wired cape here is by Valhalla Customs, and it's actually meant for my Batman Returns figure, but I bought it off eBay a long time ago, and I just repurposed it for this figure. And as you can see here, his legs are spread pretty far apart, which I'm sure many collectors won't be comfortable with, but I personally don't mind. I figured life is short, we just gotta enjoy the little things while we can. In any case, all that's left now is to attach Batman to the clamp, turn on the LEDs within Superman's heat vision head sculpt, place him on the table accordingly, and there it is, Batman vs Superman. Alright, and speaking of BVS, here we have the DC Trinity standing side by side from their epic team-up on the silver screen, which was a childhood dream come true for me. Now, fortunately, there's not much involved for Superman's pose because it's pretty vanilla. All we gotta do is equip the neutral head sculpt along with the relaxed open hands. Then simply lower both arms back down to his side while keeping his entire body turned inward with his head facing more towards the left. Then we can straighten both legs at the thighs while keeping the left leg pulled a little more forward than his right. Next, simply gather the bottom of his cape together for a cleaner look, followed by some minor tweaks like bringing his chest in just a bit or tilting his head up a little more. And that's pretty much it for Superman. So now we can bring in Diana of Themyscira, Princess Warrior of the Amazons, our Wonder Woman. And man, what an absolutely gorgeous figure this is. Granted, she's not very posable due to the fragility of her thermoplastic skin, but still wonderful to have in the collection. Now, since I mentioned earlier that parts of this video would be a showcase, the remaining poses won't follow the same step-by-step instructional format. But, for reference, we'll want to equip her sword and shield to her hands, while bending both knees to about 45 degrees, with the left leg leading in front of the right, and her head tilted up and to her left like Superman. And when it comes to Batman, we'll want to bend his forearms in to about 90 degrees, while tilting his head down and to his left for a more aggressive stare. You can also use whichever long-range weapon that's included with your Batfleck figure, albeit the Kryptonite grenade launcher, the Parademon blaster, or even the tracking sniper rifle if you want. Alright, now this final Justice League showcase was included at the request by fellow collectors on social media, and so it's my personal homage to the world's finest by DC Comics. Now, in addition to community feedback, I also didn't include the step-by-step instructions for this group pose because all the techniques that are needed to achieve their individual poses were already covered either here in this episode or in my previous video for Batman. My apologies to Aquaman fans, he's not in my collection because he didn't make the cut. And so, there's my final Justice League lineup. I'm not gonna lie, I am so excited for that Snyder cut. And that's pretty much it for Justice League Superman. Now, he may reappear in a future showcase if I gain the courage to upgrade and install a wired cape someday, but Either way, I really hope you enjoyed the poses and tutorial for this episode. I have a lot of fun making these videos for fellow collectors across the community, so I can only hope you enjoy watching them just as much. If you did, feel free to show your support by giving this video a thumbs up and a follow on Instagram at posingwithpeter16. Also, I received my young rich Miles Morales from Toys Wonderland during the making of this episode, and I'm really excited to feature him in an upcoming video alongside all my other Spidey figures, so be on the lookout for a Spider-Verse posing showcase sometime in the near future, and you can subscribe for more content like this. Lastly, if you're on Facebook and want to say hi, then come join us over at 6th Gale Network. Links are down below if you need them. Once again, thanks so much for watching. As always, stay safe, take care, and we'll see you in the next video.